Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights, which is a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. And a lot of that work these days is being done virtually. You can have remote team workers complete assessments online and come together for workshops online and all of that stuff. So if you want to learn anything about DISC, harmonyinsights.com is the place to go. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, an inclusive mastermind community of HR pros, real HR pros solving real HR problems. We have over 2,500 members at this point and 10 different licensed chapters around the country. And if you are an HR practitioner or you support HR practitioners, you can learn more about everything that we do that's free and online these days at hrhotseat.com. Today, as I mentioned, is a Harmony Insights lunch date. I started doing these a few weeks ago to remain inspired by people who inspire me, in essence, folks that I know from various circles, personally and professionally. And Kelley Amadei, my guest today, certainly falls into that category. Kelley, welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. It's so great to be here and so great to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah, super honored to talk to your friends.
How the heck are you?
All things considered, I'm doing well. I love, Zoom burnout is a real thing. And also, this is the only way we can connect right now. And so it's like a love-hate relationship. I love it because I can feel a heart connection. And then, like you said, I want to turn off my video and mute myself half the day. So
you can literally sit in the same chair behind the same screen and connect with colleagues, yes, friends from school, family members, and that really wears on you at some point.
Yeah, and I think it requires a different level of attention. When we're in person, we get the benefit of feeding off of other people's energy. There's a felt sense of that. And this is like just a whole different level of presence and attention that is exhausting. Yeah.
I'm an introvert myself, and I speak a lot about networking for introverts. In the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, this is an introvert's dream. One of my favorite memes is introverts unite, just separately and in your own homes. And I thought, that's perfect. That's what we're doing now. And then even I, at this point, I'm like, okay, I really need to connect with people either in this way or just get out of my house and ask somebody how they're doing and hear something back.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that.
You have chosen, I don't choose the topics for these lunch dates. My guests do. I come to my guests asking them to be a part of it, and then I ask them what they would like to discuss. You have chosen a topic that you have called Leading in the Dark, How to Come Home to Ourselves, which I love, and I want to dive into. Can you first give people a sense of who you are and the work that you do that positions you well for this conversation specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in this space, let's call this space HR, but let's really call this space, human connection and, human understanding, building self-awareness. So everything from, I've, been in the HR world on and off for the last 22 years. And most recently, 7 years ago, started my own business. So done everything from being an HR generalist to running global change management for Heineken. And the common thread that pulled through every experience I had, also including working with Erich years and years ago, has been this real felt sense that when we talk about leadership and we work with leadership, it has always felt to me like an outside-in experience. And that to me was antithetical to my personal experience. So I felt like we've been told to take everything from the outside and sort of layer it on top of ourselves to become the leader we're meant to be. And when I decided to go off on my own and start my own business, it was because what I thought was true for me was becoming a leader is about stripping away our conditioning and coming home to who we already are, understanding who we've been before we've learned all these other ways of being, mostly in service of others or to please others or to stay safe. And so I took neuroscience and organizational psychology and mindfulness and blended them together and created my own approach to how do we get closer to who we are so that we can be the best leader we can be, not the best leader that somebody else is, not the best, you can read any academic resource out there and try to layer that onto yourself. But really what we have to find is who are we at our essence, and then how do we honor that? And when we can do that, life is so much less effortful. And then we don't even have to talk about authenticity. It just is.
Yeah.
It just is. So that's what I've dedicated my life to, and I've dedicated my work to helping people understand who they are and then shift their behaviors and undo some of that conditioning.
And you mentioned having led global functions for Heineken. I would imagine that sort of more traditional work, we'll call it, including when you and I were working together, that every piece of that puzzle has been important in terms of shaping this world view that you have, this sense of who we can be as leaders and how we become conditioned in various ways to maybe stray from that authenticity in some way.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think when I was at Heineken, I worked in a global office and I got to travel around the world. And so I got the perspective of seeing the struggles that people were dealing with in every operating company, whether it was we were in Rwanda or the United States or Spain, all came back to how do I truly find a way to connect with myself so I can connect with you? And where I found most conflict arising was people showing up with their masks on and then like bumping into each other. And so, and sort of in collusion, but unconscious collusion, like they're both doing it and they both are doing it out of the best of intentions, but it's getting in the way of real communication, of real connection, and of real authenticity. So
I'm suddenly, I'm recognizing that we need probably 3 hours for this conversation and we only have 30 minutes. So we're going to end up,
we've got 20 to go.
We're going to end up seeing where it goes. It's very organic. And so you and I are having a conversation that is not scripted. That's really important to me, that we're just bringing something that we're passionate about together and sharing it with others and inviting them in as well. We're going to touch on pretty soon the challenges that you feel that our audience is facing these days in relation to what our topic is. But I want to make a point of saying two things. Number one, one of the many things that I admire about you, not only your background as a practitioner, what you're doing as a business leader now, is in the ways that you have served other people. So I know that you have you've done individual coaching, you've done group workshops. If I remember correctly, you did a TED Talk along the way. You have run retreats. Why is it so important to you to diversify the stage, to get in front of people in these different ways, to talk with them about how they are connecting with themselves and others?
Well, what brought me to this work was a recognition that I was who I was because of how I grew up. And I fully believed that people were capable of change. So I grew up in a super dysfunctional home, a drug addicted mom and an alcoholic father. And so I think my base draw was, I believe people have the best of intentions. I believe people want to be their best version of themselves. And then all these other things get in the way. And so what I wanted to understand was what's getting in the way. And I wanted that to be accessible, not just to corporate executives, not just the people who can pay me what I charge, but like it's the human condition. It's not the executive condition. So when I talk about leadership, I don't mean leadership in a corporate environment. I mean leadership in our life, leadership in the world. And so I was drawn to it in that way because I, for better or for worse, I have this eternal optimism that we can all, and it's not change so much as it is shifting to coming back to what we already know to be true, but have been taught or conditioned otherwise. And so my process is really about helping people decondition themselves. And it's a lot of questioning. It's like, how can we question ourselves? How can we question our behaviors? How can we question our belief system in a way to understand if it's truly ours, or if it's meant to protect ourselves, or if it's meant to please somebody else? And how do you work with that in relationship, not just in a vacuum?
Yeah. So let's get into some of the challenges then that our attendees and others potentially face these days in terms of learning who they are and getting about some of that unconditioning. What's right off the bat, off the top of your head, what is one of the biggest challenges that you think that we face in this area?
I think it's in the title of, I think we think that we're supposed to know, fill in the blank, know something. And And so oftentimes we end up manufacturing some reality or some truth to serve this knowing that we think people expect us to have, particularly as leaders. So if we're going to talk about it in the context of, the work of an organization or the work environment, if you're leading a team, even if you're an individual contributor, but you're leading within an organization, we've created this story that people expect us to know something, and it puts an incredible amount of pressure on us. And I think what's happened in this moment in time, this pandemic, if it has done nothing else, has driven home that we actually have no idea what's coming the next tomorrow. I mean, if we think back to, January 1st, where we all thought we'd be on May 28th, most of us probably had some semblance of a plan, even if it was vague. Not one of us was right. 0 people were correct. None of us knew. So for me, it's the great equalizer, and we actually don't know, but in order to feel safe and to feel like we're in control of something, we manufacture a knowing around what's going to happen. And so I think that's the biggest challenge is we are all in this place right now where there's this pressure to know even more because we're so uncomfortable, right? Everybody's so uncomfortable because we don't know what's coming. And so you have 80 million people out there telling you that they think they know what's about to come in order to make us feel more comfortable. And so I think the biggest challenge is, how do you get comfortable with discomfort? How do you get comfortable with discomfort in this world where we actually don't know what's coming? And then what does that mean for your day-to-day life? What does that mean for your day-to-day organization, for your team, for your family?
I've seen, I've already mentioned memes already, and I'm going to mention another one, which gives you a sense of how much time I spend on Facebook these days. But another one I've seen is if you, basically anybody who answered the question 5 years ago, where are you going to be doing? What are you going to be doing? Where are you going to be in 5 years? Everybody got it wrong. So not just, a month or 2 months or however long ago. And speaking of social media, it strikes me also that social media gives us the sense that everybody has it figured out, that everybody else, suddenly all of my friends are experts in, in all things coronavirus. And before this, it was something else. And I get the sense then that, wait a minute, that if they have the answers, I should have the answers, whether it's about what's happening to me personally or about what's happening to my team, where my organization is going. Everybody else seems to know, so I also need to know. Have you heard that from others as well, that social media sort of reinforces this sense that you need to have and should already have the answers?
Yes, like either you or should already have the answers, or you should be looking there to get the answers because somebody has it, or that there's an answer to be had.
Right.
Rather than sort of an organic unfolding of, let's be in this moment, and then in this moment, and then in this moment, and just be responsive to each moment. And that's not to say you don't plan, right? We have to plan a bit, but hold it more loosely. And I think so interesting you bring up social media, because when this all happened, I was like, okay, I'm, supposedly a thought leader in this space, and so maybe I should ramp up my social media presence. And I was like, the last thing I want to do right now is tell people what they should be thinking or what they should be doing. Like, I want to give less advice, not more advice.
Yeah.
And so I removed myself completely. I stopped posting, which may have been a risk, but because of that pressure. So I'm also a little bit of a rebel. So it's like, if you make me feel like I'm supposed to do something, I'm like, no, I'm not. So,
I know this about you.
Yeah, you do. So there is this whole field of people out there like, I have the answer, follow this ritual, do this, take these steps, read this news source, and you'll have what you need to be able to know what to do. And we're all making it up.
Yeah. We are, some days more than others.
I'm making it up. I'm like, I'm making up what I know for me. And if it works for people, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
I'd love to share a quick poll with people. It's a simple poll. It is anonymous, and it says, how okay are you with not having all the answers? 1, very okay. It's not possible to have them all, or somewhat okay. I'd prefer to have answers when possible. Or 3, just thinking of not having the answer makes me anxious. Kelley, you know me well enough to know the work that I do around DISC and personality styles, and I will plant myself firmly in that bucket of people who really values information and values data and wants to have an answer. And if I don't have an answer, I feel at times less about myself, that I have not measured up in some way, as a leader, as a husband, as a friend, fill in the blank. Would you agree that there are various personality styles that you've come into contact with your own coaching and workshops that have an easier time with not knowing, or is that simplifying it too much?
Um, I don't know many people that have an easier time with not knowing,
Okay.
personality type or otherwise.
Hmm.
And then when you add the construct of an organization to it, where that's what's rewarded, knowing is what is rewarded. And right now, for better or for worse, I mostly coach C-level executives, and they certainly, regardless, and they have all different personality types, every single one of them feels like they're supposed to know something.
Hmm.
And so I think it's totally human, right? So it's also like our biology. A lot of the work that I do is based in neuroscience and our biology. And it's like our brains do not perceive psychological threat any differently than we do physical threat. It's just evolved, if you believe in evolution, right? It's evolved from like being cavemen running away from the tiger to we now create this sense of we have to save ourselves from something, and knowing is the answer.
Uh-huh.
And I think what's lost in that and why this matters to me is in my knowing, I leave you out as a leader. In my knowing, I make you smaller. Not my intention, but I think, and this is not, take this with a grain of salt. This is not all things all the time. But in general, I think the best way to come to anything is in co-creation. And my willingness to say, this is my point of view. I might not be right. I might not know. I'd love your input. Let's collaborate around this together. Let's problem solve together. We create a new possibility. But if I come in with a totally firm sense and maybe even false sense of I already know, I've shut down any ability for you to have your own knowing. So I shut you down. And then we might lose out on a greater opportunity. And also I'm reinforcing in my own psyche, my own neuroses, like this sense that I've got the answer. And then I leave other people out. And real leadership, I think, is about being inclusive and empowering people. And that, again, that sort of organic co-creation. If you ask people, if you did another poll and to ask people, are you more inspired when your leader asks for your input or when your leader tells you what you have to do or what is right or what is wrong? I would imagine most people want to have some input. They want to be a part of that.
We're getting some information here in the chat area that's supporting what you're saying. Laura says, I view not having the answer as an opportunity to have a conversation with someone where I can learn even more.
Yes.
And someone else chimes in, I would agree, I will have more opportunity to learn others' view on various topics and remain open-minded. And this is all very much resonates with me because it's an underlying tenet of what we do through the HR Hot Seat Mastermind community. It's not doing away with, but it's downplaying the quote unquote subject matter expert and saying,
yeah,
come one, come all, because each of us is bringing perspective and experience to the conversation that is equally valuable to anything that anybody else may bring. Whether or not I'm an expert in a given thing, that's less of a concern. What we are concerned with is coming together so that we are stronger as an organization, as a group, as a community, than any one of us would be on our own.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, that's a big mindset shift. I love it. I love the point of view on if I don't know, I can learn something, right?
Yeah.
So if we go into any situation with the openness and the mindset of an intention to learn, it shifts the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
As opposed to an intention to know and to share and to be, right?
People have chimed in on our poll. So I'm going to end that poll and share the results. It looks like we're split 50-50. Half of our audience today is very okay with not having all the answers, and half of us are trying to figure it out as we go. And I think we're kind of all in that bucket to some extent, is figuring this out as we go. You said something just a moment ago. There's knowing, and then there's being right. As soon as you said, we have this drive to want to be right, that immediately speaks my disc language, because I am that person who is, not only do I want to know, but then I want to, whatever I profess, I want to be right in some sense, as if there's this universally accepted, rightness or sense of perfection. And I'm always driving at that. So, from the moment you proposed a conversation with the title, certainly coming home to yourself, but then as we were talking about leading in the dark and having the sense that I'm not going to have the answers and I don't know what's coming next, and I have to act without that certainty as a leader or otherwise, I'm starting to sweat a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and so two comments on that. I mean, that need to be right. What we end up doing then is collecting all the evidence to support that that's true and dismissing all the evidence that would support otherwise, right? So then we become even less inclusive, and most oftentimes it's unconscious either. It's not like willful and intentional, but it happens. It's that bias to happen to be able to support our point of view. I do want to talk a little bit about the coming home to ourselves piece,
Please.
because I think that is probably more important, also considering our audience right here who's much more comfortable with the not knowing. For me, it's about cultivating an awareness, right? So I think we all have an idea of who we are, right? Certainly if you're joining calls like this, you're working on yourself, you're working with your teams, your self-development is part of your path. And a big part of that, I think, is being willing to be still with yourself, to notice, if we're talking around knowing, notice where it is, like take 2 or 3 days and notice, where are you getting triggered into feeling like you need to know? Is it true that you don't feel like you have to know? And just sort of leave that open and look around. Like, I'd like to think of it as we are coming home to ourselves, we look at ourselves like we're an anthropologist and we're just collecting information so that we can really better understand ourselves. So in the course of a day, where am I getting triggered to feel like I'm supposed to know something? Where am I getting triggered to feel like I'm supposed to control something to feel safe? When I feel unsafe, how do I know I feel unsafe? So I always ask people to first see what they feel in their body. Like, when you've been triggered, where did you feel it in your body? Did your heart race? Did your chest get tight? My palms sweat? Everybody has a different physiological reaction. And that physiological reaction is your first indicator that you're being triggered, but we usually miss it. And by the time we miss it, we've gone into an automatic response, which has worked for us in the past. And so this inquiry and curiosity and openness around observing ourselves to see, where are we getting triggered around not knowing? Where are we getting triggered around controlling? Usually provides a little bit of a surprise, like, because we think, again, this, I feel like I'm like, who's on first? Because we think we know we don't care, or we think we know that knowing isn't important to us, but maybe we're wrong. So I'm a person who would say, I'm generally comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm generally comfortable with not knowing. But when I pay attention to where it is that's showing up in my life, it shows up way more often than I think it does.
Would you say then that is something that I hear you saying there's a certain level of observation.
Yes.
And I would imagine that there are some people who feel that they were born observant and they are sensitive to these things and pick up. I mean, my wife and I joke all the time. She can tell a single degree difference in temperature, and will either be able to sleep or not sleep based on that single degree difference in temperature. That's an entirely different tangent that we don't need to go down. But would you say then there are people that are born sensitive, and you have to be born sensitive and observant to make this work? Or is that a skill like other skills that you can develop, recognizing those triggers that you're talking about?
It's absolutely a skill you can develop. I mean, a lot of leaders that I work with have never, and I'm not using never lightly, have never sat still to pay attention to, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? What happened right before? How did I feel during? What happened after? What were my reactions? What were my behaviors? Because we just move through life. And so and every one of them who had never done it before now knows how to do it. There's a framework, there's 100 different frameworks you can use, but there's a framework that you can use to capture this information, to, again, be curious and be open, and to cultivate it as a habit. So for me, it's all about, we're habitual creatures, whether we intended to be or not. And most of our habits happened automatically because we survived a particular situation. And so this is about cultivating a habit on purpose, cultivating a habit of self-observation, self-reflection on purpose, before moving to change. Because that's the other piece of this, where I feel like you could come to this topic and be like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go into the world and I'm going to be comfortable with not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, tomorrow I'm going to have oatmeal instead of a donut.
Mm-hmm.
You can, it's not a knowledge problem, right? It's it's a habituation problem. And so you can go in with that intention, and I guarantee you in a week or two you're going to be back to feeling like you need to know something.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to observe first. Don't change. Don't try to change your behavior. Just watch it for a while and maybe squirm and get a little uncomfortable, and then experiment with different ways to shift that.
This immediately makes me think of a book that I believe you turned me on to back in the day. Isn't it The Power of Habit? Charles Duhigg has a lot to say about this. And I honestly wish we had Brene Brown with us as well to talk about the vulnerability piece. That could take us off on yet one more tangent. I see that, I personally see that as a challenge to some of this, as well as just, and maybe it's been implied in our conversation, but being vulnerable to say, I don't have the answer. And even that I'm okay with that. I mean, there's just a vulnerability that's sort of wrapped up in all of this. And rather than go down that road, in the time that we have left, I want to leave people with very concrete tips, takeaways. If people joining us today, as soon as they leave this conversation, want to make progress toward not even being comfortable with not knowing, although that's part of it, but I like this part about having a stronger sense of who you are, absent the conditioning that we've all experienced in some way. If people want to develop, if you want to call it self-awareness, whatever you want, what is something actionable that people can do to move in that direction?
I think there are two simple things. I mean, there's many more complicated things you can do, but two simple things. Like, I like to look at it as what's digestible and easy, and easy to not avoid. So one is, before you wake up, not before you wake up, once you wake up, before you even go to the bathroom in the morning, take 3 intentional, slow, deep breaths. Start your day with a deliberate focus. And then I like to suggest to people to twice a day, put a reminder on their phone to pause and breathe. So even if you're in a meeting, you know, things are changing now because we're all at home, but even if it pops up and you're in a meeting and it says breathe, or whatever word works for you, it's just an intentional pause. Because building in these intentional pauses is what's going to allow us to disrupt the automatic behavior. So start in the abstract. You don't start in the crisis. So you start to cultivate these habits outside of needing them. And then the other thing would be to get curious, just to pick something that matters to you. Pick something that, and don't pick the hardest thing, like pick something that's getting in your way. So forget knowing or not knowing, pick a behavior that you think might be getting in your way and not serving you. And just observe it and watch it. Watch where it's showing up. Watch who it's showing up with. Watch what the situation is. Get curious about it. Who are you with? Where are you? What time of day is it? What's the feeling in your body? And do it for a week. And, you know, you sort of remember as often as you can. Like, you know, if you do it once a day, great. And then take a look at it and see, okay, what's the common denominator here? What's triggering me into a behavior that doesn't serve me or doesn't feel like me? It's just me self-protection, or it's armor, and right, the opposite of vulnerability. And that's what a lot of these behaviors are about self-protection. So just doing that, if you did that and nothing else, you can't unknow it at that point. You've already seen it. And you'll naturally start to shift and be aware when it's happening.
Isn't that funny? The one thing that we do automatically, which is breathe, that we realize there's so much value in remembering to breathe and being intentional about it instead of just letting it happen.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
well,
you know, that's the one thing we can always come back to. Luckily, you know, while we're still alive, the breath is always there for us. So
yeah,
that is your anchor. I teach little kids meditation in an elementary school, and it's like we talk about our breath as our anchor. You can always find your anchor. Like when you drift off, just come back. Let that anchor pull you back into yourself.
Kelley, I just, it goes without saying, but I'll say it. I have so much respect for what you do and how you do it. I'm always so inspired by our conversations, and I wish we had so much more time this afternoon, but I think you've really given people some valuable information, some really valuable things to think about. And if they choose to run with it, this 30-minute conversation could have a lasting impact on their personal and professional lives.
Thank you, Eric. And thanks for inviting me to the conversation. I love talking to you. And as we said earlier, we could do this for hours. And I always say, take what you like and leave the rest. I mean, that's what else can we do?
I'm going to invite people to stick around if you want. If you need to leave for the afternoon, you're welcome to do that. Before you go, though, a couple of things. Number one, Kelley, for people who want to follow up with you to learn about the coaching and the workshops that you do and just learn more about what you're putting out into the world, where can they find you online?
My website, my company's name is SparkShift, and it's www.spark-shift.com. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn under either SparkShift or under my name, Kelley Amadei. And I respond on my own. I don't have somebody else that does it for me. So
that's important. I appreciate you mentioning that. We're going to
yeah.
follow up with people with a couple of links, perhaps, to some of the things that we've talked about. If you found this conversation to be a valuable one, I hope you'll go back to where you registered for this at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates for future lunch dates that I have coming up. Tomorrow is the second ever pop-up panel where I'm bringing people together, again, with that same underlying value of everyone having something valuable to say and an experience or a perspective that's worth sharing. So in the moment, I choose among volunteers for the panel, and I choose 2 to 3 panelists in the moment who want to share their perspective, and that is what I'm calling a pop-up panel. I'm hoping it takes off and becomes the next best thing, but I would love for you to join me for that. That's tomorrow at noon, and that's going to be 45 minutes instead of the 30 minutes that the first one was. Going into next week, we have a few more conversations on deck that I'm excited about. One with Brandon Murphy of Lucas James Talent Partners. He's going to talk about just a recent realization that he's had about how important it is to give first in life and in business. And I really like that thought and that idea, as well as Kate Seworth from Launchways is going to talk with us about the impact of personal connection on individual relationships, and then also brands and business, how connecting with people personally can make such an impact on the way that we conduct ourselves personally and professionally, and a bunch of others coming up that I've just recently gotten on the calendar that I'm excited about. So you can find all of that at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. We're going to continue the conversation with those who want to stay. But again, Kelley, thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's really great to see you all. And I hope you all stay healthy and safe wherever you are.